everyone, welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, welcome. My name is Mary Chris, and for today's video, we're gonna go part 2 for our Democracy Now! Reaction. Get ready with me. Grab a coffee, grab a tea, grab your makeup, or if you're eating, whatever. Come with me, get ready, keep calm, and drink coffee. Such an oxymoron, I love it. And we're gonna finish the reacting to Democracy Now!'s Friday, August 17th show. And this one, they're going to be spending the rest of the show discussing Aretha Franklin's history, and I'm just so excited. I haven't seen this, and I actually saved it so I can film this video and film my raw reaction. And as per usual, let's sip a tea. Sip a tea, no, it's coffee. As per usual, I'm gonna step aside, watch it with you guys, or if you're listening, because Democracy Now!'s format is actually, they made sure that it's good for radio stations as well, because they air on radio as well. So you can do your cooking or do whatever, do laundry or whatever it is that you're doing. You don't need to watch it. If you don't want to, just listen to it. It's very listen friendly, and we're gonna get ready together. So let's get to it.
Tributes are pouring in from across the country and around the world for Aretha Franklin, the Queen of Soul. She died Thursday at her home in Detroit at the age of 76. For decades, Aretha Franklin has been celebrated as one of the greatest American singers of any genre, who helped give birth to soul and redefine the American musical tradition. In 1987, Aretha Franklin became the first woman to be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. She held the record for the most songs on the Billboard Top 100 for 40 years. Rolling Stone ranked her the greatest singer of all time on its Top 100 list, calling her a gift from God. Aretha Franklin was born March 25, 1942. She was a child prodigy, and as young as 4 years old, she was already considered a musical sensation. Her father, Reverend C.L. Franklin, was a preacher in the New Bethel Baptist Church in Detroit, where Aretha, still a child, became a star soloist, standing on a chair as she performed to the congregation. By her early 20s, Aretha was appearing on national television, including The Steve Allen Show, where she performed Won't Be Long in 1964. In 1967, Aretha Franklin signed with Atlantic Records and began releasing a series of landmark singles that transformed popular music. Her 1967 cover of Otis Redding's Respect became an international hit. Aretha recorded Respect on Valentine's Day 1967. It soon became the soundtrack of the civil rights movement. A year later, she would sing at Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s funeral after his assassination in 1968. The Reverend Jesse Jackson said Aretha anonymously helped fund the civil rights movement for decades. He said, quote, "When Dr. King was alive, several times she helped us make payroll. Aretha has always been a very socially conscious artist and inspiration, not just an entertainer." In 1970, Aretha Franklin offered to post bail for Angela Davis, who was in jail on trumped-up charges. She told Jet magazine, "Angela Davis must go free. Black people will be free. I'm going to see her free if there's any justice in our courts. Not because I believe in communism, but because she's a black woman and she wants freedom for black people," Aretha said. Later in the show, we'll speak with Professor Angela Davis herself about what Aretha Franklin's support meant to her. Aretha would go on to sing at the inaugurations of 3 presidents, Jimmy Carter, Bill Clinton, and Barack Obama. In a statement, Barack and Michelle Obama said, quote, "For more than 6 decades, every time she sang, we were all graced with a glimpse of the divine. Today, we spend the hour looking at the extraordinary life and legacy of Aretha Franklin. After break, we'll begin with two guests here in New York, Columbia University's Farah Jasmine Griffin, and at Duke University in North Carolina, we'll be joined by Mark Anthony Neal. And then from Martha's Vineyard, Angela Davis herself will join us to talk about what Aretha Franklin meant to her. Stay with us. Think by Aretha Franklin here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. As we remember Aretha Franklin, the Queen of Soul, we're joined here by two guests. In New York, Farah Jasmine Griffin joins us, professor of English and Comparative Literature and African American Studies at Columbia University. She's the author of a number of books, including If You Can't Be Free, Be a Mystery, In Search of Billie Holiday, and Harlem Nocturne, Women Artists and Progressive Politics in New York During World War II. Her latest article for The Nation, Aretha Franklin, Musical Genius, Truth Teller, Freedom Fighter. And in Durham, North Carolina, we're joined by Mark Anthony Neal, chair of the Department of African and African American Studies, where he's also the founding director of the Center for Arts, Digital Culture, and Entrepreneurship, the host of the weekly webcast called Left of Black. He blogs at newblackman.blogspot.com. He's author of several books, including What the Music Said, Black Popular Music and Black Public Culture, and Songs in the Keys of Black Life, a Rhythm and Blues Nation. We're going to start there with Mark Anthony Neal. Your response when you heard Aretha Franklin is dead.
Well, no doubt for me, I was saddened. It was the end of an era in many ways. For myself personally, Aretha Franklin literally defined my childhood, defined my life. I don't know a world without Aretha Franklin being there. I was introduced to her at a very young age by my mother, who was a Aretha Franklin stan, for lack of a better way to describe it. Was fortunate to first see Aretha live on the Apollo stage when I was 5 years old, when she did that legendary one-week stand in 1971.
And, you know, I said Aretha Franklin is dead, and maybe in body she is. But, of course, this music, her talent, her this giant will continue to live on. Farah Jasmine Griffin, you first heard that Aretha was in hospice care.
Yes, I heard from a dear friend that she was in hospice. It had not yet been announced. And then within less than 24 hours, the news was all over social media. So
talk about what she has meant to you.
Oh, my goodness. Like Mark, I can't remember a time when I didn't hear Aretha's voice. I think I probably heard it in the womb. My mother and aunts were so in love and enamored of her. She has meant the very best of American music and American culture. And we always knew about her commitment and support to the political struggles of Black Americans.
Why don't you talk about that? Because in the headline of your piece for The Nation, one of those descriptions is freedom fighter.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that people often talk about Aretha coming up through the church, as many of our great singers do, and that the church is a place certainly where she found her voice and where she learned her craft, but it's also the place where she was steeped in a kind of political culture. Her father is in the tradition of the great prophetic Black preachers. He himself was an activist. Her church was an
Franklin,
Reverend C.L. Franklin, right, a very gifted orator, but also an activist and confidant of Martin Luther King, for instance. And so right alongside with her musical training, I think it would have been that kind of political culture as well. And then she sort of stepped out on her own, having always supported Dr. King, supported Reverend Jesse Jackson. But I think especially with that public statement in support of Angela Davis, she really sort of articulated her own sort of political courage and conviction.
I want to turn to an interview with Aretha Franklin in 2015 with CNN's Don Lemon.
When you look at what's happening in Ferguson, what happened with police officers or whatever, do you think your songs were the anthem to civil rights, to the civil rights movement? So many songs were
Well,
played.
respect was a mantra for the civil rights movement. It was.
Do you feel we're moving forward or fast enough?
I think that we have come a very, very long way. We've come to the forefront in many fields, of course, entertainment, sports, and so on, but we still have a long way to go.
I had earlier in the week...
But we have made great strides.
You think so?
Yes.
Because you were there, you saw it, you were on the front lines.
No, I wasn't on the front line,
think-
but I was with Dr. King from church service to church service. I went out on a mini tour with him when he first started.
That's a line.
Yeah.
That's a line.
Well, I was behind Dr. King, and I was a very young girl.
That was Aretha Franklin speaking with Don Lemon on CNN. As you listen to what she said, Mark Anthony Neal, could you expand on her civil rights activism? She, again, emphasizing, no, I was behind the scenes. I was not on the front lines.
You know, she had the challenge of being a black artist who was in the mainstream, who was craving certain kind of mainstream success, and had to be very careful and delicate in the ways in which they engaged the civil rights movement, which in many sectors of American society was still very controversial. And like many of her peers from that time, one of the ways that they offered support was to be able to offer financial support in the background, to obviously be able to offer spiritual support. The fact that she was willing to go on the road with Dr. King was important and compelling in that particular moment. And even though Aretha Franklin's music wasn't overtly political, again, when you listen to Respect and the way she just stops to spell out respect, it resonated in many wonderful ways for black folks who heard something more than simply a woman singing about the man that done her wrong. We don't really get an overt political statement in her music until she does that amazing Young, Gifted, and Black album in 1972, where she covers Nina Simone. And in many ways, it becomes her anthem to acknowledge the ways that she was connected to this movement in a more overt way. We start to see her dress in a more African-style garb. It was her at this point, at the peak of her career, at the peak of her powers, at the peak of her maturity, and she could stand out on that limb and acknowledge that she was a political force also.
You talk about 1972. Can you tell us about her relationship with Esther Phillips and what happened at the Grammys that year?
You know, we hear a lot of things about the diva that Aretha Franklin was, and that was true, as it was with anybody who had that kind of incomparable talent. But she's up for nomination in 1972, and she's in a category with Esther Phillips for an album called From a Whisper to the Scream. Brilliant piece, and Esther Phillips had gone the long road. I mean, she had gone through the Chitlin circuit. In many ways, she's one of those artists who had created a space for Aretha to fill. And when Aretha wins the Grammy Award for this, you know, Aretha makes this incredible gesture by offering her Grammy Award to Esther Phillips to acknowledge both who she was in the field and her legacy, but also the impact that she had on her as an artist. Mm.
I wanted to ask you about Natural Woman and her relationship with Carole King.
You know, it's a wonderful song. Carole King was part of a generation of women who were performing and writing their own music and not necessarily getting credit for being the singer-songwriters and producers that they were. We see the same case with an artist like Laura Nyro from that period of time, and even Aretha Franklin, who very often was the one behind the keyboard for her own music. They were creating this great music, but they weren't getting credit as producers. When Aretha records Carole King's A Natural Woman, it was really a kind of coming together of these two geniuses, the songwriter and the performer. It becomes one of Aretha Franklin's most significant songs. For me, her use of the song on her live album, Amazing Grace, where she does a conflated version of You Make Me Feel Like a Natural Woman and also You Got a Friend, which was also a song that was written by Carole King, and Thomas Dorsey's Precious Lord, where at the moment Carole King is being elevated as really the quintessential American singer-songwriter after the release of Tapestry. And she takes Thomas Dorsey's, who most Americans don't know at this period of time, and really puts them on the same plane, making an important political claim and cultural claim about the significance of a figure like Thomas Dorsey at the same time that she's acknowledging this great woman singer-songwriter in Carole King.
You suggested that Aretha Franklin was one of the few black artists at that time who understood the importance of controlling the narrative. Explain what you mean.
You know, Aretha was burned early in her career. She's on the cover of Time magazine in June of 1968. And it's really a story about the impact of soul music at this point in time. But they also do kind of a profile of her. And there was elements that came out in this story that she was never very comfortable with. And so she began to control the narrative in a way in which, we think of her as being very private. And there are lots of artists who do that. But it was also about controlling the narrative at a time where she was, by far the most well-known Black woman in the world. So there were significant stakes in her being able to control her story the way that she did. When David Ritz writes her writes with her memoir in 1999, of course, they have a famous falling out because, there are parts of the story that David Ritz would like to share, and Aretha Franklin is not willing to go there at that point in time. We know the way that, for instance, there's an amazing film of the Amazing Grace concert that was shot by the late Sidney Pollack, that Aretha has never allowed to be released. Some folks might think of that as her being kind of a diva, but it was also about making sure that she controlled the way that we would interpret her legacy. And you see that really up until her death, the way that she carried her sickness over the last 8 years, in which folks suspected things but didn't really know. And we saw that up to the end where she really controlled the narrative about how she would die and how she would be remembered.
Farah Jasmine Griffin, if you could expand on this. You write in your piece, this is what we hear in Aretha's voice, truth. It's a voice that contains the spiritual and the field holler, the blues moan, gospel shout, and jazz improvisation. It's neither timid nor coy. It's sensually grounded, spiritually transcendent, and completely lacking in contradiction.
Yes. I think that Aretha is one of those artists. They come along every once in a while, and their artistry embodies traditions and history. And you can hear all of those great Black musical forms born probably with their origins in West Africa, but certainly nurtured in the United States. You can hear every one of them in Aretha's voice. And then being the kind of singular artist she is, she offers something new. There's history, but there's also something new, a kind of era-defining sound there. And the other thing is that we make these false dichotomies between sexuality, sensuality, spirituality, and Aretha's voice just refuses those dichotomies. She refuses to see them as contradictions. They're all part of one humanity, and we hear that in her voice as well. And I love the fact that she is never sentimental, she's not coy, she's very, articulate and forthright in the emotions that she expresses with her singing.
And her role in creating soul.
She's a very important architect of soul, along with someone like Ray Charles, who's, also another important figure in taking what they've gotten out of the church, Sam Cooke as well, what they've gotten out of the church, that way of bringing the spirit down and really moving people to a place of transcendence, and then putting that in popular music form. Whereas Black audiences were familiar with this, I think many mainstream audience members were not. And it was really quite earth-shattering. She is a primary architect of the music we come to know as soul.
You met Aretha Franklin?
I did. I had the opportunity to meet her, I should say the honor and the privilege. I went to a concert at the invitation of a dear friend, Michael Eric Dyson. And afterwards, Professor Dyson was a close friend of Miss Franklin. So he took me backstage. My husband was there. I think the Reverend Jesse Jackson was there. It was the night before Whitney Houston's funeral, which is why I remember it so well. And she was dignified, and I was struck by her humility, and I was struck by her just quiet, very quiet, understated elegance. She was so well dressed, like a church mother, and just very welcoming and very humble.
I want to go back to 1970. Aretha Franklin offered to post bail for Angela Davis, who was jailed on trumped-up charges. And I want to read from a Jet magazine article from December 3rd, 1970. Its headline, "Aretha says she'll go Angela's bond if permitted." In it, Aretha Franklin is quoted saying, "My daddy says I don't know what I'm doing. Well, I respect him, of course, but I'm going to stick by my beliefs. Angela Davis must go free. Black people will be free. I've been locked up for disturbing the peace in Detroit, and I know you got to disturb the peace when you can't get no peace. Jail is hell to be in. I'm going to see her free if there's any justice in our courts, not because I believe in communism, but because she's a black woman and she wants freedom for black people. I have the money. I got it from black people. They made me financially able to have it, and I want to use it in ways that will help our people. Those are the words of Aretha Franklin. She's talking about Professor Angela Davis, who joins us now from Martha's Vineyard. Professor Davis, Angela, welcome to Democracy Now!
Thank you, Amy. Thank you.
It's great to have you with us. Can you talk about your thoughts on this day, the day after we learn of the death of Aretha Franklin, and what she meant to you?
Well, of course, this is a very sad day for people all over the country. Aretha was an integral part of many people's lives, including my own, and not only because she made a public statement indicating that she would pay my bail back in 1970. But perhaps I'll say a few words about that to begin. When Aretha decided to hold a press conference announcing that she would pay up to $250,000, which in today's currency would be probably about $1.5 million. It was really a high point in the campaign, and I believe that many people who may have been reluctant to associate themselves with me because of my communist affiliations probably joined the campaign as a result of Aretha's statement. When I actually became eligible for bail, unfortunately, Aretha was out of the country. She was in the Caribbean. And during those days, prior to the emergence of global capitalism, money did not flow so easily across national borders. And therefore, a white farmer from Central California who agreed to put up his farm. But that was such a moving moment. It was a moment in which the campaign for my freedom achieved a really popular status among people in this country and probably throughout the world as well. I will be forever grateful to Aretha because I think she played such an integral role in the success of the campaign.
Now, you never actually met Aretha Franklin, did you?
I feel as if I met her, but because I feel she's a part of my history, and her music was so much a part of, and continues to be so much a part of my own individual life as well as my collective lives. But I never actually met her in person.
Can you explain the circumstances at that time, what was happening to you, which also talks about who Aretha Franklin is, that she came out so strongly and so interestingly talked about the fact that she was thrown in the can, she was jailed in her own home city of Detroit?
Yes, absolutely. As you pointed out, she said she had already been jailed for disturbing the peace. And it seems as if she realized that it might be necessary to disturb the peace a bit further. But of course, the fact that I was a member of the Communist Party at that time made many people reluctant to offer public support because they thought they might be associated with communism and thus might be placing their own lives in jeopardy. I was charged with murder, kidnapping, and conspiracy, 3 capital charges. And at the time when Aretha made this statement, I was actually not eligible for bail because capital offenses were not bailable. As it turned out, the Supreme Court of California abolished, at least temporarily, the death penalty in California, which meant that for a short while I was eligible for bail. I'm one of the few people who were actually released because within a few days, the Supreme Court amended its decision by indicating that all previously capital offenses would remain non-bailable.
And you were held here in New York, right? Not far from the studios of Democracy Now! And California was seeking your extradition. You were pending extradition to San Rafael, California.
Well, actually, yes, I had been in jail at the Women's House of Detention in Greenwich Village in New York, but I had at that time already been extradited. I was in a jail in Palo Alto. I had been it's a long story. I had been extradited to Marin County, and then we got a change of venue to Santa Clara County. So when I was actually released on bail, it was from the jail in Palo Alto.
We're going to talk more about her involvement in the civil rights movement in front of the scenes and behind the scenes, and her just remarkable music and contribution. As many have called her, as Mark Anthony Neal said, Aretha Franklin, arguably the greatest American singer of the 20th century. We're talking to Angela Davis, Mark Anthony Neal, head of African American and African Studies at Duke University, and also Farah Jasmine Griffin of Columbia University. Stay with us. Do Right Woman, Do Right Man by Aretha Franklin, who died this week at the age of 76. The Apollo marquee is emblazoned with her name, the Queen of Soul. I'm Amy Goodman. We're spending the hour on the life, the music, the genius, the activism of Aretha Franklin. She sang at 3 presidential inaugurations: the pre-inauguration of President Carter, the inauguration of President Clinton, and the inauguration of President Obama. And that's where we're going to go right now. This is Aretha Franklin singing My Country 'Tis of Thee at President Obama's first inauguration, January 20th, 2009. Aretha Franklin singing at the first inauguration of President Barack Obama, singing before the largest audience ever to witness a U.S. inauguration. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org. I'm Omi Goodman. Our guests are Angela Davis. And Angela, I just wanted to ask you, here she's singing My Country, 'Tis of Thee, Sweet Land of Liberty. This is the same woman who decades before was saying she would post bail for you. Post bail for you as a black woman who must be stood up for. Sweet Land of Liberty, your thoughts?
Well, of course, Aretha's singing, the meaning she imparted to the song she sang, transported us all to another dimension. And so I see a utopian element in that. She is not necessarily saying that this is the land of liberty, but that rather we should be inhabiting a land of liberty. I think it's so important, first of all, not to be literal. Second of all, to recognize that people can make contributions to political struggles by raising the consciousness of communities, of collectives. And I think that Aretha always produced this kind of community through her singing. And I'm particularly interested in the way in which she brought a feminist dimension before the emergence of Black feminism to our consciousness with respect. And of course, with Sisters Are Doing It for Themselves, the duet she performed with Annie Lennox. I think that her contributions to the creation of a kind of yearning for freedom, a way in which she helped to create communities, as one might say, aesthetic communities of struggle, is so absolutely essential.
Angela Davis, you're the author of Blues, Legacies, and Black Feminism, Gertrude Ma Rainey, Bessie Smith, and Billie Holiday. How do you see Aretha Franklin's contributions to music history? How do you hear Black feminism expressed in her music? Well, certainly Aretha's contributions are invaluable. And as Mark Anthony Neal and my friend Farrah Griffin have already so eloquently pointed out during your program, Aretha was the best manifestation of soul, and that means that her music helped to produce communities, help to allow us to feel a part of something larger than ourselves. And in that sense, I think she follows in the tradition of the wonderful blues women of the 1920s and 1930s, Billie Holiday later on. Our history over the past decades is unimaginable without the great voice of Aretha Franklin. Aretha Franklin placed more than 100 singles in the Billboard charts, including 17 top 10 pop singles, 20 #1 R&B hits. She received 18 competitive Grammys, as well as a Lifetime Achievement Award in 1994, the first Black woman to be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Mark Anthony Neal, you have said that if she hadn't been Black, she would have had the same stature as Barbra Streisand, though many would say she certainly does, and perhaps beyond, of course. But talk about why you make that comparison.
Aretha and Barbra Streisand were both at Columbia Records in the early 1960s. Aretha actually covers or records a version of People the same year that Barbra Streisand does. I think the record label didn't understand what to do with Aretha Franklin. On the one hand, they didn't know what to do with the gospel power that was so much a part of her music. But when I talk about the comparison to her and Barbra Streisand, Barbra Streisand could have a career where she could imagine herself as more than just a recording artist in the studio. She could imagine herself on the Broadway stage. She could imagine herself making movies. Aretha Franklin did not have those kinds of opportunities open to her because, in fact, she was a black woman in the recording industry at that period of time. In some ways, the ascent that we've seen of Beyonce over the last decade to do so many different types of cultural work on various platforms is the full realization of the kinds of opportunities that Aretha Franklin helped create for generations of artists who came after her.
The significance of Aretha Franklin being jailed in Detroit. Do you know that story, Mark Anthony Neal?
I do know. I was hearing it for the first time as we all just heard her a few minutes ago talk about it. But of course, there's a larger history, of course, of New Bethel, which was critical to the Great March of Freedom that was done in June of 1963, where Martin Luther King first revealed his "I Have a Dream" speech, at least an earlier version of it. So I could imagine as a young person growing up in Detroit, given what Detroit was, there might have been many opportunities for Aretha Franklin to disturb the peace, if you will.
I want to turn to Aretha Franklin, talking on NPR's Fresh Air about one of, her most famous songs, the song we began with, Respect.
In later times, it was picked up as a battle cry by the civil rights movement. But when I recorded it, it was pretty much a male-female kind of thing, and more in a general sense from person to person. I'm going to give you respect, and I'd like to have that respect back, or I expect respect to be given back.
Let's go back to Aretha Franklin singing Respect. Aretha Franklin singing a live recording of Respect. Aretha Franklin, who died this week at the age of 76 in hospice care in Detroit. Angela Davis, as you listen to her singing Respect, and this time in the era of Trump, as he talks about possibly jailing the only senior black aide in the White House who was just fired, Omarosa, as she talks about his use of the N-word. Your thoughts about what right now, Aretha Franklin would say or sing about this time?
Well, certainly this is a period when we have to draw on the promises of the past. Given the situation that exists as a consequence of the election of Donald Trump, while he has indicated that he wants to move the country in a backwards direction, we have to remember what it was like when Aretha Franklin sang "My Country 'Tis of Thee" during the first inauguration of Barack Obama. And I think that, music allows us to remember those promises and to recognize that those promises can become agendas of struggle in the present and the future. Aretha will forever animate our collective sense of a desire for change. And Donald Trump cannot do anything about that.
Well, we're going to end it there. I want to thank you all so much for spending this day remembering Aretha Franklin. Angela Davis, author, professor, and activist at University of California, Santa Cruz. Again, that headline, Jet Magazine, going back decades. Aretha says she'll go Angela's bond if permitted, offering to pay whether it's $100,000 or $250,000 to free Angela Davis. Farah Jasmine Griffin, professor of English and Comparative Literature and African American Studies at Columbia University. Among her books, If You Can't Be Free, Be a Mystery, In Search of Billie Holiday. And Mark Anthony Neal, Duke University professor, author of many books. And that does it for our show as we go out with respect. Democracy Now! Is a job opening for a broadcast engineer here in New York City. Find out more at democracynow.org. Democracy Now! Produced by Mike Burke, Renee Feltz, Dina Guzder, Robbie Karen, Laura Gottesdiener, Carla Wills. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hi guys. Okay, we finished our makeup. Did you get ready with me too? Leave that in the comments down below. So anyways, we've finished watching Aretha Franklin, and what stood out to me, let me say that again. We've finished watching Democracy Now!'s tribute and kind of showcasing Aretha Franklin's other side, aside from her, of course, genius, and you know, she's a legend, but also showed her being an activist in the civil rights movement. And I think that's just so powerful that, yes, you know, she's an artist, but she can also be an activist. And it's really fascinating that at that time, she was very hesitant to, you know, be really in the front lines of the activism, because of course she just had a, you know, she wants to succeed, and she knows how it can be where, you know, as soon as you're labeled maybe as an activist, that people cannot wrap their minds around that, yeah, you can be an artist and be successful and also be an activist. So, and I think that still is kind of true now, that if you really see the people who's really voicing out their opinions louder are the ones who's already established, because they know they've already made it. But at least she was behind the scenes, and of course she's become more and more vocal, and that was really good. If you guys have any comments or reactions, please leave them down below. Thank you so much for joining me, and if you want to join me again next time, definitely subscribe, hit the notification bell so you will be notified for my future videos, and share for your Aretha Franklin lovers out there who also, you know, likes makeup. And that's it. I'm ready to go. I have to go with my kids. So anyways guys, we'll see you in my next video. Bye.